Hello and welcome to my May 2021 wrap up. So I have to make another video for this one. Basically, I am re-recording this one. I had made one video about my May 2021 wrap up a while ago, but then I just found out that while I was editing that there was tons of interference sounds in the background, and so I just kind of had to scrap that while I was editing it. So anyway, I intended to upload this one much earlier than than this, but now that I'm re-recording it, so I hope this one is okay. So yeah, welcome again. This is my May 2021 wrap up. I know that it's already the end of June, which is strange, but I just kind of want to have a short summary video on the books that I read in May, sort of like a summary and a wrap up essentially on the things that I read last month. I read 6 books, and I would say that compared to April, my May was pretty nice, because I must say that I had a few 5-star reads. Some of the books weren't exactly very stellar, but they were just kind of lukewarm, but none that I would say, none that I would consider as really bad. So I'm gonna start with this one, which I didn't exactly start May with a bang. This is The Mountains Sing by Nguyễn, Phan. So this one is actually a family fiction. It's like a domestic fiction, kind of like a family saga of sorts. It is marketed as this kind of family epic of a family across 3 generations in 20th century Vietnam, and the setting was actually 2 different conflicts in Vietnam, kind of interconnected in conflicts. The first one is the land reform of North Vietnam sometime in the 50s, and the second one, the second setting of this book is actually the Vietnam War, and the story for that particular portion of the story actually takes place sometime near the end of the Vietnam War, so it's kind of like in the late 70s and early 80s or so. So this book actually focuses on 2 main characters essentially. So the first one is actually her Ziulan. So she is the daughter of a rather rich parents. They are basically of a middle to upper class in their society, and they're kind of like landowners at the time. So Ziulan's story actually is taking place around the time of the land reform, and because they are landowners, they pretty much face the wrath of the peasants. Basically, there was a revolt in their village, and many of Ziulan's family has been attacked, and there are deaths happening, and Ziulan basically has to kind of escape the whole situation with 5 children in tow. And the second part of this novel, actually, the 2 parts, they are not really separated like part 1 and part 2, but they're more like interwoven together. So the novel actually moves in this non-linear fashion. The second part actually concerns Ziulan's granddaughter. Her name is Hương, and Hương lives as a teenager around the time of Vietnam War, basically around the conclusion of the Vietnam War. And during the Vietnam War, Hương parents basically were involved in the war. So her mom was actually a nurse, I think, or a doctor, and her father is the is involved in the war, fighting in the war. So this story also kind of concerns how Hương deals with all that, how her family is breaking apart due to the war, and how she kind of has to live constantly in fear because of the uncertainty that is happening around her. So this is essentially kind of like a war themed family fiction, and it's definitely marketed that way. Somewhat of a family saga, but I personally feel that this book is kind of lukewarm. It does not really delve so much into the nuance of the war. What I find particularly striking in this book is it really focuses on how the characters are feeling, their emotions very much, which in a way is good, but I think it's way too much on that. It kind of turns really sentimental on in many parts, and kind of makes this book feel just mostly emotionally manipulative kind of a book that seeks to evoke emotion more rather than makes you think about the characters, the settings, and just think about the plot and all that. It doesn't really make you feel that way. Rather, it just kind of forces the emotions out of you, which sometimes it does. I think it does do that, especially at the end. I did feel kind of sad, but at the same time I just felt like it wasn't so full body. Now, another thing that I feel this book is a bit lackluster is I think that this book feels kind of apologetic about itself. This book is basically it's just a story of the Vietnam people, about Vietnam culture, a Vietnamese culture, and it was written by a Vietnamese author. But there seems to be this kind of feature in the writing that makes it feel like this book is trying really hard to explain itself, to explain the Vietnamese part of itself to non-Vietnamese readers. For example, it just kind of it explains the meanings of many different words, many different Vietnamese words and concepts, and it kind of makes the writing feel somewhat stilted, and I don't really like that. The naturalness of this of the prose just kind of goes away because it does that. So yeah, I find that this book is a bit weak in that sense. So moving on to the second book that I finished, this is Carol by Patricia Highsmith. This book was originally published in 1958. I think it was originally published as The Price of Salt under the pseudonym Claire Morgan. So I actually have a video made for this book. If you are interested to check that out, feel free. I put the link down in the description box below. So Carol is it's kind of like a romance story about these two women in 1950s New York. The main character's name is Therese Belivet. So Therese is working at a department store because she doesn't really have a steady job as a stage designer. And one day while she was taking care of the cashiering job, and Carol comes into the store looking for toys to buy for her daughter, and she sees Therese, and I guess you could say that their romance just kind of sparks from there. They interacted with one another, and it kind of leads to a series of dates. And the second part of this novel, so basically this novel is kind of split into the first and second part. The first part is basically how Therese and Carol just starts the relationship, and the second part turns into this road trip kind of a story where Therese and Carol just go on a road trip together as a couple. Now at the same time, Carol is dealing with divorce from her husband, and she's also having to fight for custody for her daughter. And so Carol has a lot of things happening in the background, while at the same time she is trying to just kind of build this new relationship with Carol. And this being the 1950s in the US, lesbian relationship was not really something that was accepted by the society at the time. It was not exactly like nowadays. It was kind of like, almost criminal, you could say that. And there's definitely this sense of stake as to what it would cause Carol and Therese, if they were to be discovered that they were actually in a relationship by the public, especially for Carol, because she is fighting for custody for her daughter, and that can affect her chances at getting winning the custody. So I really like this novel. The prose is really simple. It's kind of light, and it's very straightforward. So the prose is just pretty much very concerned with telling its own story, and that's it. Now the next one that I read and finished was a buddy read with Jyotsna of Jyotsna's Bookscapades. This one is Madeline Miller's The Song of Achilles. I actually wanted to read this book for a very, very long time now, because I've seen so many people talking about how good this book is. And I've also seen how many people saying that, after reading this book, they feel very, very emotional. Some of them cry. And, it just got me really intrigued. I was really curious when, hearing people saying that, because I also kind of want to experience, that the state of being really emotional when you consume a book. So I have not really felt that way many times, a lot. So I'm just really keen on trying out something that would make my reading life more colorful, I suppose. But yeah, we read this book over the course of 2 weeks. The Song of Achilles is essentially just about the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus. Now this book is narrated by Patroclus. And Patroclus is kind of like this, he is portrayed as this somewhat unremarkable person who is not really loved as a boy by his father, and then he is sent away to live at in exile with in a different kind of like different state in the king's court of a different state, where he actually meets Achilles. Achilles is the prince there, and from there he and Achilles just somehow forge a relationship with one another. It starts with a friendship, and over time it kind of grows into something more and more tight. And it basically just turns into romance. I think that is, it goes without saying, this is a romance book. And this is kind of like the myth retelling of the myth of Achilles. I've not really familiarized myself with the original myth, so this is kind of like my fresh my fresh experience with the myth. And one thing that I find this book is, it kind of rubs me the wrong way, is that this book is very heavily focused on Patroclus. Because I came into this book with the expectation that it was going to be like this romance between Patroclus and Achilles, but then the way that this book feels to me is that it is mostly Patroclus. It's a Patroclus story, and then the second person that it focuses on is of course Achilles, but the focus on Achilles is much less than Patroclus. It doesn't feel balanced, and it kind of makes me hard to feel that this is a romance between these two people, and yet the novel just feels like this is a Patroclus story, and Achilles just happens to be this dumb and pretty love interest character who doesn't really seem to have much personality. Honestly, I don't feel that Achilles has much personality in this book, so his character feels kind of lackluster. Now, another issue that I found is that the rest of the characters, this book has plenty of side characters. Sometimes it feels like this book is trying to, it's like it has a checklist where it is trying to stay faithful to the original myth, and therefore it has to contain so and so characters. So it's kind of like whenever any character appears in a chapter, then a checkbox in the list is checked. And as a result, we get like plenty of side characters in the background, but that's what they are. They are in the background. They don't really enrich much, especially the romance of Patroclus and Achilles. They are just there, and we don't see much personality from them. They feel very, very one-dimensional. So you end up with Patroclus, who is super three-dimensional, because we hear a lot of his thoughts, we hear his most intimate feelings and emotions and all that. And then you have Achilles, who is, I don't know, two-dimensional. And you have all the rest of the characters as one-dimensional figures, which really does not feel balanced to me. It does not really complement, the characters don't really complement each other very well. And so I was a little bit disappointed by that. Yeah, so I had high expectation for this one. The next book that I finished was The Weight of Our Sky by Hanna Alkaf. So this book is actually a YA fiction written by a Malaysian author, and this book is about the racial riot that happens in Malaysia on 13 May 1969. And the focus of this story is a girl named Melati. So Melati, she is actually she's going to the cinema with her friend without knowing that this riot is going to erupt. But yeah, she goes to the cinema, and then the riot happens outside, and their movie experience is kind of interrupted by some guy who wields a big knife into the cinema and just pretty much segregates everyone into Malays and Chinese. So what basically happens from there is that Melati just kind of has to find a way. She escapes the cinema, and she kind of has to find a way to get back to her home and find her mother. Because at the same time, Melati is also someone who is suffering from OCD. So basically what happens in the story and her mental health issue is that she has to constantly count in threes. Otherwise, that there's a voice that she attributes to as a jinn, would actually say that if she doesn't do that, then her mom is going to die horribly. And so she is really scared all the time. So she really she constantly does that, and it really kind of like sort of a hindrance to her as she is trying to navigate the streets of Kuala Lumpur with all of the bloody riots happening around her. At the same time, she is also helped by this Chinese family who temporarily shelters her and allows her to stay for a while as the violence are still happening outside for a few days. So I actually thought that this book was very well written, and I really liked the fact that the setting of this book was actually the May 13th incidents, which is actually, I would say, a very highly politicized, highly politically charged event in the history of Malaysia. I appreciate that, and I also like the fact that the way the riot is described here, it is quite vivid and it's quite horrifying as well. And there are certain parts that are fairly emotional, and so I would say great job that it does that. This book didn't do that. But yeah, The Weight of Our Sky actually caused me to feel emotional. So I think that's great. Moving on, the next book that I finished was also a Malaysian written book. So this one is by Shih-Li. This is Ripples and Other Stories. This book is a short story collection, obviously from the title. So this short story collection actually contains just basically the Malaysian experience. of different levels. Actually, it does not only focus on Malaysian of a particular background. It focuses on stories of Malaysian of different ethnicities, religions, and also economical background as well. So you get stories that are very varied. Like this entire collection, even though it's quite thin, it's only about 180 pages long, but you can still get stories that are just pretty much diverse. I really love this one. Now this book, at the same time, it is also very dark. Some of the stories are quite dark because they deal with abuse, domestic abuse, child abuse, sexual abuse. You also have things that are quite violent, like suicide. I think homicide is there as well. And then you also have stuff like riots. Basically just kind of really bloody things going on also happen in this book. And then at the same time, you also have things like racial tensions and religious tension as well. Basically all of the things that could happen in Malaysia, it happens in this book, and so I really like that. It's a really nice collection. Even though some of the stories are quite dark, some of the stories, they can also feel somewhat funny. So you end up with, some of the stories that are particularly dark would end up becoming some sort of a black comedy kind of a story. So if you are interested in reading books about the Malaysian experience, I would say that this is a good starting point, although I think this book is also a little bit difficult to find. But yeah, this is definitely one of the books that I would recommend everyone to read. And lastly, I finished Not a Virgin. So this one was actually a buddy read with Sean of Sean the Book Maniac. And we also read this book within 2 weeks. I actually read this book fairly quickly because I found that this book was really, really compulsive. Anyway, this book is about a group of teenagers, old boys, who live in a town near Jakarta. So it centers around this one particular teenager named Ricky. So one day Ricky just decides to enroll to a pesantren, which is an Islamic boarding lodge school, something like that, because he kind of has some family issues. And after he boards at the pesantren, he after a series of events, strange series of events, he encounters another schoolmate of his with whom he has never really talked to before. His name is Paris, and Paris is someone who is quite feminine in his appearance. So definitely there is already this strong physical difference between Ricky and Paris, and but somehow they end up forming this really odd friendship. But it is from that kind of exchange that he kind of starts to be he kind of starts to discover more about the sort of hidden and underground society of the LGBT community in Jakarta. And in his adventure, together with Paris and two of his friends with whom he will encounter later, they just kind of go through and meets different kinds of people, go through different kinds of experiences. Basically, he ends up going to gay bars and becoming go-go dancers and stuff like that. So this book is kind of interesting because it talks about those kinds of issues, not only the LGBTQ issues in Indonesia, but it also talks about the general issues like poverty among some communities, class struggles in Indonesia as well, and how certain people have to kind of find ways to earn money just in order to live. The chapters in this book, they are quite short, and I think that kind of contributes to why I find this book to be very fast-paced. Basically, in each chapter you'll find something new happening. I really love that. And yeah, overall it's kind of a wonderful book. It's a tragic comedy of sorts, so you can kind of figure out what would happen based on that label. I love it. I really like this one. A little emotional, but not as much as some of the books that I mentioned earlier in this video. So that's it for all of the books I read in May, and I hope some of these books would interest you, and maybe you have read some of the books that I mentioned in this video also. But yeah, that's it for my May 2021 wrap up, and I'll see you again in a different video. So until then, take care, thanks for watching, and bye.